A city alive with commerce and culture. It is also a city of faith, Greek Orthodox faith, part of the great eastern arm of Christianity. But there was another world here once, of which only tantalizing fragments remain. Those who reach back through time, both above ground and below, are in search of a world that was equally alive and equally devout, the world of the ancient Greeks. It still speaks to us today through one of its legacies, Greek mythology. It was populated by many gods and goddesses, each with certain powers in the world, and each with a story of their own. For tens of thousands of years, predating biblical times, accounts of the gods and their doings were passed down by storytellers.
It is extremely hard, but one tries to fantasize of what was it like in those days. I think favorite stories of gods must have been, thinking back, what did the child think and was impressed about was, how did Zeus give birth to Athena from a headache? Apollo, who was a very wild young man, who then developed into being the god of order, of music, of art. Poseidon, who would create storms when he was angry. Athena, who was the protector of our capital city and was in favor of peace.
Presiding over all was Zeus, god of the sky, god of thunder.
Zeus is a sky god, and you're in the domain of Zeus when you're out there in nature. Zeus had some control over whether you had a good day or a bad day, and a good life or a bad life. He had two jars on the doorsill, and there was a jar of good and a jar of evil. And to each man, Zeus would pour out a portion of good and a portion of evil.
There was Aphrodite and Artemis, two sides of the same coin.
Aphrodite. And what is she the goddess of? She is the goddess of sexuality, female sexuality. She's a goddess of beauty. She's associated with lots of fertility issues. You have Artemis on the other side. Artemis, who is this chaste virgin.
And Apollo, who, like all the gods and goddesses of ancient Greece, had more than one power.
He is the organizer, the civilizer. He's the one who brings roads to places where there were never roads before. He's the one who heals, but he also can bring plague. And this is something that happens in the case of many Greek gods. If they can cause something, they can also stop it.
He was a god, I heard it most brilliantly put, a god of distance. And therefore, he would deal with people not face to face and hand to hand. He was better at shooting his bow and killing people from a very far off distance. And therefore his loves perhaps are best kept at a distance too.
These gods and goddesses evolved as the ancient Greeks sought to find meaning and perhaps faith in an often challenging world. Their stories were embellished and changed over time as different civilizations came into contact with ancient Greece.
Greece has been inhabited since about 70,000 BCE, and there were invasions of people from the Middle East and from the north, and each invasion led to not another set of divinities, but further layers of divinity added to the existing divinities. So Greek gods are a real amalgam of multiple cultures of the Middle East mostly.
The Greek gods were of such diversity that they are unlike many of the other gods from around the Mediterranean because they incorporated elements of a lot of different peoples around them. and they don't clearly match a lot of the other peoples, say, in Celtic or Italian religions.
These stories were passed down through oral tradition, but sometime around 750 BC, they were collected, organized, and written down. Although scholars debate whether one author or many authors were involved in this effort, the popular belief is that there was just one, Homer.
As far as we know, the real crystallization of Greek mythology was around the time of Homer, 750 BC. And with Homer, we find the creation of Greek mythology and the creation of the gods. Homer gave the Greeks their gods. Homer was effectively the closest thing the Greeks had to a Bible.
In the beginning, Homer tells us, there was Okeanos, a spirit in the form of a great circular, endless river, flowing eternally back upon itself. There was another presence too, Tethys, sometimes called the first mother. When they finally mated, they began the line of descent which eventually produced the gods and goddesses of the ancient Greeks. Some 50 years after Homer, the poet Hesiod composes the Theogony, in which he too describes the creation of the gods. But according to Hesiod, the world began differently. First, there was a supernatural presence called chaos, by which Hesiod means emptiness, not disorder.
Once upon a time, there was chaos. And after chaos, there was a goddess called Gaia, Earth. And Gaia slept with, married, mated Uranos, heavens.
Uranos, however, did not want children. He felt threatened by them and kept them from being born. Gaia conspires with Kronos, one of her unborn children, who castrates his father, presumably from within his mother's womb. Uranos' severed genitals fall into the sea, from which a surprising entity emerges, Aphrodite, goddess of love. These stories make up what is known as Greek mythology, derived from the Greek word mythos. It implies something untrue. But for the ancient Greeks, these stories were a matter of faith. They helped explain how and why the world works as it does.
Interestingly, love and war, or violence and sex, are deeply connected in Greek mythology, and not only in Greek mythology, but in a number of mythologies. Why are these two things deeply connected? I think that the ancient peoples, and certainly the Greeks, felt that deeply passionate feelings were somehow connected in the human mind and in the human emotions. That is, great desires and great fears or great hatreds were somehow linked.
In this way, the stories and characters of Greek mythology had real-life application. Hesiod's creation story goes on to tell how Kronos frees his brothers and sisters from Gaia's womb. These beings would be known as the Titans, born only after their father has been castrated. The theme of conflict between father and son continues, as Kronos himself now kills his own children.
Kronos married Rhea. Every time Rhea gave birth, he'd swallow the children. Rhea desperately wanted to have some children, and so she took one baby, Zeus, when he was born, and wrapped him up and hid him in a cave in Crete to be raised, and gave Kronos a stone wrapped up in swaddling clothes that he swallowed so that he thought he was swallowing the baby. Well, Zeus grew up, came, attacked his father, and all the children emerged. And those were the beginnings of the Olympian gods.
Zeus retrieves the rock with which his mother deceived his father. It can be seen even now at the sacred shrine of Delphi.
There's always a kind of inherent conflict and tension between fathers and sons. Greece has been, really until this century, a subsistence economy. And so if you have a small farm, the father's in charge of that. The son, even the first son, is not going to get any kind of rights until the father moves on, retires or dies.
What is the concern there? There's a real concern, obviously, about issues of succession and power.
After Zeus rescues his brothers and sisters from their father, they seize Mount Olympus. From this stronghold, they battle for control of the world against their father, aunts, and uncles, all of whom are Titans. Finally, the gods and goddesses of Olympus prevail. They acknowledge Zeus, who is also god of the sky, as their king. But human beings have yet to appear on the scene. The story of creation in Greek mythology goes on in Hesiod's telling. Generations of gods continue to struggle with one another, all before humanity's arrival in the cosmos.
I think it says something very interesting about a culture, whether it considers its formative moments to be ones of conflict or ones of sort of unified production, peaceful production. I am overwhelmed each time I study or teach a course that deals with Greek mythology, how persistent these conflicts are.
After triumphing over the Titans, the great god Zeus marries Metis, a Titan herself, and therefore his aunt. Eventually, they have a daughter who bursts fully grown and armed from his forehead. This is Athena, goddess of warriors. Other gods and goddesses enter the world, each with different functions. They all have, however, one thing in common, an attribute which sets them apart from virtually all other divinities in the ancient world. Their images are human.
If you think of Egyptian religion with its gods having animal heads, various animal bodies, or Near Eastern, Akkadian, Mesopotamian, Hittite religion, where you see divinities associated with lions and other fierce animals, the Greeks' decision to somehow represent the gods as being like Greeks is really an innovation. And we're not really sure where it came from.
When you think about divinity, you're talking about the unknown. And you really can only talk about the unknown in terms of the known. In the Hebrew Bible, in Genesis, it says, God came down and he walked in the Garden of Eden in the cool of the evening. It's almost impossible to talk about divinities without doing something like that. Xenophanes said, if horses could draw, horses would draw their gods as horses.
In Homer's telling, it is only after the gods and goddesses take up residence on Mount Olympus that the story of human beings begins to unfold. The Judeo-Christian account of the world's beginning culminates in God's creation of man, who was given dominion over all the other creatures on earth. However, the ancient Greeks believed the birth of humans is of little importance to the cosmos.
Although the Greeks had a human-centered universe, their view of man was almost as an afterthought. He was a smaller creature in the universe, something certainly lesser than the gods. And therefore the creation of humans had to take a second or third place down the line in the Greek world of the cosmos and the Olympian deities. So why was the creation of man given such a small role